I took the Althari contract because it was 6 months, the pay was fair, and the posting included quarters with a window that faced east. That was the whole of my reasoning. 23 years of contract medicine across 11 systems, and by then I chose my postings the way most people choose a seat on a transit shuttle, proximity to light. The promise of quiet, nothing more complicated than that. The Renville spire was neither quiet nor simple, but the window faced east, and in the mornings the light came through at an angle that warmed the sill enough for Taravine. I had been carrying a cutting of it from post to post for the better part of a decade, a stubborn little herb that survived stale air and artificial gravity, and the occasional 3-week stretch in a shipping crate when postings overlapped. It needed sunlight and water and not much else. I liked that about it. The shuttle from the orbital dock landed on a platform halfway up the spire's western face, and the first thing I noticed when the hatch opened was the air. Clean in a way that station air and ship air and border outpost air never are, not filtered, not recycled, just clean, with a faint sweetness underneath that I later learned was the native grasses on the plateau below. The second thing I noticed was the height. The Renville spire rose out of a crystal plateau like a single pale finger pointing at the sky, and from the landing platform I could see the lower terraces falling away below, gardens, walkways, balconies, all of it lit by a sun that was slightly warmer and slightly larger than Earth's, hanging in a sky the color of faded cornflower. The palace itself was something else entirely. I had worked in alien facilities before, the Korath orbital clinics, the Delveni border stations, a 12-month rotation on a Petheri mining platform where the corridors were so narrow I had to walk sideways to reach the infirmary. But the Renville spire was not a facility. It was a cathedral that someone had decided to live inside. The walls were a mineral the Althari called Sorvin crystal, pale blue, translucent in strong light, warm to the touch despite looking like ice. The corridors rose in gentle spirals, wide enough for 4 people abreast, lit by panels recessed into the ceiling that shifted from soft gold at morning to a cool silver blue by evening. The floors were polished stone, veined with something that caught the light and held it, so that walking through the spire at dusk felt like walking across the surface of still water. I noticed my boots left scuff marks. Nobody mentioned them, but I started wiping my soles before entering. The Althari themselves were tall. That was the first thing you noticed, 7 feet at the shoulder for most of them, slender as drawn wire, with skin the color of winter lake ice and hair that caught light the way polished silver does. Their ears came to a subtle point just above the temple, and their eyes were large and pale, lavender, most often, or the blue you see in glacier melt. Beautiful by any standard that was not parochial, but the kind of beautiful that made you feel like you were standing in a museum, surrounded by things that were not meant to be touched. I was the 4th physician on the palace rotation, human medicine specialist, which in practice meant I handled the 11 human staff members, groundskeepers, 2 kitchen assistants, a structural engineer, a handful of maintenance technicians, and filled gap shifts on the Althari medical rotations when someone was off-cycle. The senior physician was an Althari named Nethavar, who had been court physician for 22 years, and who wore his white coat the way a general wears a dress uniform. He briefed me on my first morning with the economy of someone who had done it many times, and did not enjoy it any of them. "You will follow protocol," Nethavar said. He stood behind his desk rather than sitting. All 3 of his assistants stood behind theirs. The palace medical staff operates under the court standard of conduct. You will familiarize yourself with sections 1 through 40 before your first rotation. Physical examinations follow the structured sequence. You do not deviate. You do not improvise. You do not linger. "Understood," I said. "You are here because the human staff require a human physician, and because alliance integration protocols mandate human medical representation in any household employing more than 8 human workers. You will perform your duties competently. You will not be a distraction." I nodded. I had been briefed like this before on other postings, by other senior staff who wanted me to understand that I was a concession to policy rather than a welcome addition. It never bothered me. The work was the same whether they were glad to have me or not. My quarters were on the 5th terrace, the staff level, well below the royal tiers but above the service basements. The room was small by Althari standards, which meant it was the largest single room I had lived in since the apartment I rented in New Caravel 18 years ago. The ceiling was high enough that I could not touch it on my toes. The bed was too long, but that was a problem I solved with a rolled blanket at the foot, and the window faced east, as promised. I set the Taravine on the sill that first evening, watered it from the basin, and went to sleep. The first 3 weeks were unremarkable. I saw the human staff for routine checkups. 2 of the kitchen assistants had mild respiratory irritation from the Althari spice compounds, which I treated with a simple barrier inhaler I compounded from the pharmacy stores. The structural engineer had a recurring shoulder impingement. One of the groundskeepers needed a mole evaluated. Standard work. Quiet work. I ate my meals in the staff canteen on the 4th terrace when I had time, and in the corridors when I did not. The canteen served Althari food adapted for human digestion, grain dishes, mild soups, braised vegetables, and a pale sauce that tasted faintly of anise. It was fine, but I preferred to pack my own lunch when I could. Dense bread from the lower kitchen, an herb spread I made myself from the Taravine on my sill, and whatever oils the kitchen assistants could spare, a thermos of brewed barley tea. Old habits from years of postings where the canteen was either too far away, too crowded, or serving something I could not identify. On the 23rd day, Nethavar informed me that I was being added to the princess's medical rotation. He said it the way you might tell a janitor he had been assigned an additional corridor. No ceremony, no preparation beyond the procedural. The Princess Ilieth Wren, he said, consulting a schedule tablet. Quarterly wellness examination. Structured sequence, full panel, she is the heir. You will follow the protocol precisely. Is there anything specific I should know? I asked. Conditions, allergies, history. The heir is in standard health. The examination is routine. He paused, then added, as if it had just occurred to him, you will conduct the examination in the Sethali antechamber on the 42nd terrace. You will not enter the heir's personal quarters. You will speak only clinical observations. You will not initiate conversation beyond what the structured sequence requires. When the examination is complete, you will leave your findings on the antechamber console and descend. Understood, I said. The heir, he said, and there was a careful quality to the way he placed the word, is not a patient in the way you may be accustomed to. She is the Wren. The sequence exists to ensure her well-being. It does not exist to facilitate a relationship. I did not say anything to that because there was nothing to say. I had worked with royalty before. The Koreth had a minor princeling on the orbital station who required monthly blood panels and who was not permitted to be addressed by name. Protocol was protocol. You learned it, you followed it, and you did your job inside whatever lines they drew. The 42nd terrace was quiet in a way that the lower levels were not. Down on the staff tiers, there was always sound footsteps, the hum of climate systems, conversation in the canteen, the clatter of the kitchen. Up here, the corridors were wider and the ceiling higher, and the crystal walls absorbed sound so completely that my own breathing seemed loud. The light panels were set to a soft, warm gold that never shifted. It felt like permanent mourning. The Sethali antechamber was a long room with a vaulted ceiling and windows along one wall that looked out over the palace gardens far below. There was an examination alcove at the far end, a reclined seat, a console, the standard diagnostic suite, and a waiting area near the entrance with 2 chairs, a low table, and nothing else. The chairs were Althari proportioned, which meant my feet did not quite touch the floor when I sat. I set up the diagnostic suite, calibrated it for the Althari baseline ranges Nethavar had provided, and waited. She arrived exactly on schedule, accompanied by a protocol officer, A tall, composed Althari named Kivirl who stood just inside the door and did not sit down. The princess walked to the examination alcove without greeting me. She sat in the reclined seat. She folded her hands. She was tall, like all of them, but narrower than most, fine-boned, with skin a shade paler than the standard ice blue, closer to the color of fresh snow in late afternoon light. Her hair was silver-white and worn in a single braid that fell past her shoulder. Her eyes were pale violet, and they looked at me the way a window looks at rain, present, transparent, registering without engaging. "Good morning," I said. "I'm Dr. Kale. I'll be conducting your quarterly examination today." She inclined her head by perhaps 2 degrees. Kivirl, by the door, inclined his by 1. I ran the structured sequence. Heart rate, respiration, neural conductivity, bone density, blood chemistry, lymphatic flow, dermal integrity. The Althari diagnostic suite was elegant. It did in 12 minutes what human equipment took 45 to accomplish, and the results were precise to a margin that made me briefly envious. I recorded each value on the antechamber console, cross-referenced it with her historical file, and noted the trends. She sat perfectly still throughout. Not the stillness of tension, the stillness of long practice, of someone who has been examined and measured and assessed so many times that the process has become no more remarkable than breathing. Her eyes moved once to the window when the light shifted. Her hands remained folded. She did not fidget, did not sigh, did not look at me with curiosity or apprehension or any of the small signals that patients normally give when a new physician examines them for the first time. I had the strange, uncomfortable sense that I could have been anyone, any doctor, any pair of hands running the diagnostic, and it would have made no difference to her. She was healthy, slightly underweight. Her mass index sat at the low edge of the Althari standard range, not clinically concerning but noticeable as a trend. It had been declining gently for 4 consecutive quarterly reports, a slope so gradual that no single examination would flag it. I flagged it. "Your mass index is trending low," I said. "Not urgently, but it's been a steady decline over the past year. Are you eating regularly?" She looked at me. The pale violet eyes settled on my face and stayed there for a moment longer than the rest of the examination had warranted. "The heir's meals are prepared and delivered on schedule," Kivirl said from the door. "I'm sure they are," I said. "I'm asking if she's eating them." The silence that followed had a texture to it, something taut and fine, like a thread pulled between 2 fingers. Kivirl's posture did not change, but there was a quality of attention in his stillness that had not been there a moment before. "The heir's nutritional intake is monitored and adequate," he said. I looked at the princess. She had turned her gaze to the window. "All right," I said. I completed the file, uploaded it to the console, and packed the diagnostic kit. "I'll note the trend and recommend a follow-up in 30 days rather than the standard 90, just a precaution." Kivirl walked me to the corridor. At the threshold he paused. "The mass index notation," he said quietly. "I would recommend against emphasizing it in your summary to Nethavar." "It's a medical observation," I said. "It is a medical observation that has been made before." His expression did not change. "By others, Nethavar is aware of the trend." I looked at him for a moment, and the heir's nutritional intake is adequate," he said. He inclined his head and closed the door. I went back to the staff tier. I mentioned the mass index trend to Nethavar in my written summary. He acknowledged it with a single notation. Noted. Continue standard monitoring. No action required. I did not think about it much that first time. You learn in contract medicine that some institutions have blind spots, places where the system has decided a thing is not a problem, and no amount of observation will make it one. You note it, you document it, and you move on. But I kept noticing. I had reason to visit the 42nd terrace more often than the quarterly exam required. The human structural engineer was surveying the upper crystal supports, and I had agreed to do his 6-month physical on-site rather than making him descend 12 levels to the staff clinic. That work took me past the Sethali antechamber 3, sometimes 4 times a week. The antechamber was always empty when I passed, but through the inner corridor beyond it, the one I was not permitted to enter, I could see the edge of a dining alcove. A low table, precisely set, silver vessels, a tray of small, elaborate dishes arranged with the kind of geometric precision that made them look more like a ritual offering than a meal. The princess ate there, I learned, alone. I asked one of the kitchen assistants about it, Merritt, a human woman who had been on staff for 3 years and who made the best flatbread I had found outside of Earth. The heir eats alone, Merritt said. She was rolling dough on the long stone counter, her forearms dusted with flour. It's the separation. When the heir reaches bonding age, I think it's around 16 in their years, they start eating alone, sleeping alone. The protocol officers manage the schedule. Everything comes through the service corridor. The food goes in, the tray comes out. Every meal, I said. Every meal. Breakfast, midday, evening, the tray goes in. An hour later it comes back. How much of it comes back? Merritt looked at me sideways. More than goes in sometimes. She rearranges it, I think, moves the dishes around. The vessels come back half empty, but the food is in different places on the plate, like she was sorting it rather than eating it. And no one eats with her. No attendants, no companions. No one, that's the point of the separation. The heir eats alone until they're bonded, paired, married, whatever the Althari word is. It's supposed to teach discipline, self-sufficiency. The heir answers to the throne, not to company. Merritt shrugged. I don't make the rules, I just make the food. How long has she been in separation? 6 years, I think, since before I came on. I did not say anything. I took a piece of the flatbread Merritt offered, spread it with herb paste from the jar on my belt, and ate it standing at the counter. 6 years, every meal, alone. I thought about that for the rest of the day. Not with outrage. I was too old and too experienced for outrage at someone else's cultural practice. Every civilization had its rituals for shaping its leaders, and most of them looked strange from the outside. The Korath fasted their heirs for a week before coronation. The Delvini tattooed their princes at age 10. Humans, for that matter, had sent their own royal children to boarding schools at 7 and called it character building. But I was a doctor, and a patient who had been eating alone for 6 years, who was losing weight by quiet increments that nobody wanted to flag, who rearranged her food rather than eating it. That was a patient whose relationship with meals had gone wrong somewhere, and it did not take a specialist to see it. The 30-day follow-up came around. I climbed to the 42nd terrace with my diagnostic kit and a plan to run the same panel and see if the trend had continued or stabilized. It had continued. Her mass index had dropped another fraction, still within the acceptable range, still not clinically urgent, but the slope was steady and it was pointing down. You're still losing weight, I said, slowly but consistently. She was sitting in the examination alcove. Kiverl was by the door. She looked at me the way she had looked at me the first time, attentive, transparent, unreachable. Are the meals not to your liking? I asked. I can work with the kitchen to adjust the menu. Different preparations, different textures, sometimes a change helps. The heir's meals are prepared according to the Renville standard, Kiverl said. The menu has been reviewed by the court nutritionist. I'm sure it has, I said. I looked at the princess. But are you enjoying them? Another silence. This one was softer. Kiverl shifted his weight, the first physical motion I had seen from him that was not deliberate. The princess said, the meals are adequate. It was the first thing she had said to me that was not a required response to a diagnostic prompt. Her voice was quiet, evenly modulated, with a faint harmonic undertone that all Althari voices carried, a resonance in the upper register, like a glass rim being touched. Adequate, I repeated. She looked at the window. They are well prepared. The kitchen staff is skilled. But you don't eat much of them. I eat what I require. I filed the results. I noted the continued trend. I recommended another 30-day follow-up. Nethavar approved it with the same single notation. Noted. Continue monitoring. It was 3 days later that the thing happened. I had been on the upper terraces doing the structural engineer's shoulder follow-up. The impingement was improving with the exercises I had prescribed, but slowly, and he wanted reassurance that he was not making it worse. We finished in the survey room on the 41st terrace, and I walked up one level to the Sethali antechamber to use the lavatory there, because it was closer than descending to the staff tier. It was midday. I had my lunch with me, flatbread from Marrett, herb paste from my jar, a sliced callan fruit that one of the groundskeepers had given me from the garden stores, a thermos of barley tea. I sat in one of the antechamber chairs, my feet dangling slightly above the floor in the Althari-proportioned seat, and unwrapped the bread on my knee. I was hungry. The upper terraces always made me hungry, maybe because the air was thinner, or maybe because the walk was longer than I cared to admit at my age. I was halfway through the bread when the inner door opened. The princess stood in the doorway. She was dressed in the pale, layered formal garments the Althari wore for their private hours, not the structured court dress I had seen during examinations, but something softer, less architectural. Her silver hair was unbraided. She looked like she had been reading. She stopped when she saw me. I stopped chewing. For a moment we looked at each other across the antechamber. I was sitting in her waiting room, eating bread off my knee with herb paste on my fingers. She was standing in her own doorway, caught mid-step, her pale violet eyes on the flatbread in my hand. "Sorry," I said. The lavatory is closer up here than down on the staff tier. I didn't mean to intrude." She did not answer. She was looking at the bread, not at me, at the bread, and at the thermos, and at the sliced callan fruit laid out on the cloth on my knee. She was looking at them the way someone looks at something they have forgotten exists. "Have some bread," I said. I did not think about it. I did not weigh the protocol or consider the separation or calculate the political implications of offering the Althari heir a piece of flatbread from a human kitchen assistant's oven. She looked thin, and she was looking at food the way a person looks at food when they are not just hungry, but lonely for the act of eating, and I was a doctor, and the bread was there. She stared at me. "It's just bread," I said. "Marrett makes it downstairs. Flatbread, herb paste. The callan fruit is from the garden." She came into the antechamber. She walked to the second chair, the one beside me, not the one across, and she sat down. Her movements were careful, almost tentative, as though she were doing something she had rehearsed in her mind but never performed. I tore the remaining flatbread in half and held out the larger piece. She took it. Her fingers were long and cool, and they trembled slightly when they touched the bread. She ate it in small bites. I ate my half. I poured a second cup of barley tea into the thermos lid and set it on the table between us. She picked it up and drank. She did not say anything. Neither did I. When the bread was gone, I offered her the callan fruit. She took 2 slices. She ate them slowly, holding each one for a moment before biting, and I realized she was not savoring the taste, she was savoring the act, eating in the same room as another person, hearing someone else chew, reaching for a shared plate. We sat there for perhaps 20 minutes. The light through the antechamber windows was high and warm, and the palace was quiet around us. When I finished, I wrapped the cloth back around the empty thermos and stood up. "Same time tomorrow," I said, "if you want." She looked up at me. Her eyes were very still. "I'll bring extra," I said. I went downstairs. My hands smelled like herb paste, and my heart was doing something I did not entirely understand. Not racing, not pounding, just beating with a heaviness that felt like the difference between doing a job and doing the right thing, and knowing they were not always the same. I came back the next day. I brought extra bread. Marit did not ask why I wanted a double portion, though she gave me a look that said she would ask eventually, and the herb paste and the thermos and a callan fruit sliced. I sat in the antechamber chair at midday and unwrapped the food on my knee. The inner door opened after 7 minutes. She came out, sat in the chair beside me and waited. I gave her half the bread. I poured her a cup of tea. We ate. The herb paste, she said after a few bites. What is it? Terravine, I said. It's a human herb. I grow it on my windowsill. You crush the leaves with oil and a little salt. You made this. Such as it is. She ate another bite. It tastes like the garden, like the air smells in the morning near the lower beds. That's the terravine, I said. It grows wild in most temperate climates. You can't kill it if you try. She almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles around her eyes shifted, and the set of her mouth changed, and for a moment she looked like a person rather than an heir. Then it passed. We ate. We did not talk much. When the food was gone, she stood, inclined her head, not the formal court inclination, something smaller, more personal, and went back through the inner door. I came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. By the end of the first week, I had stopped thinking of it as an intrusion and started thinking of it as lunch. I brought the food. She came out. We sat in the antechamber chairs and ate flatbread and herb paste and whatever fruit or vegetable Marit had spare from the kitchen, and we talked about small things. The weather, the Althari homeworld, had a long, mild autumn, and the light changed quality every few days as the orbital angle shifted. The garden, she could see it from her windows but had not walked in it in years. The terravine, she asked how I grew it, what it needed, whether it would survive in the crystal-filtered light of the upper terraces. It needs direct sunlight, I said. Real sunlight, not the panel light, at least 4 hours a day. The antechamber windows face south, she said. There is sunlight on the sill from mid-morning through early afternoon. That would do, I said. On the 4th day, she asked me about the Pethiri mining platform. I had mentioned it in passing, the narrow corridors, the recycled air, and she wanted to know more. Not the medicine, the living. What did you eat there? She asked. She was holding a piece of flatbread in both hands, tearing small pieces from the edge the way she always did, methodically, as if rationing the experience. Ration packs mostly. Rehydrated grain, protein bars, the occasional fresh vegetable when a supply shuttle came through. The Pethiri ate mineral pastes that I never tried and never wanted to. Did you eat alone? The question landed quietly. She was not looking at me when she asked it. She was looking at the bread. Sometimes, I said, when the shifts didn't line up, but mostly I ate with whoever was off duty. The medics, the mining crew, you eat with the people who are there. She nodded. She tore another piece of bread. She did not say anything else about it, but I understood what she had been asking, and I understood that the answer I had given, you eat with the people who are there, was the thing she had been missing, and the thing that no amount of protocol or court tradition had provided for. On the 6th day, I brought a different tea, a blend Marit had found in the lower stores, something the Delveni trade ships had left behind, darker and more bitter than the barley tea I usually brewed. The princess tasted it and made a face, the first unguarded expression I had seen from her, a brief wrinkling of the nose, a pulling back of the chin, entirely involuntary and entirely human in a being who was not human at all. You don't like it, I said. It is very strong. It's an acquired taste. Marit says it takes 3 cups before you stop grimacing. I will take your word for it. She set the cup down with a precision that did not entirely conceal the fact that she was pushing it as far from herself as politeness allowed. I laughed. She looked at me not with surprise exactly, but with the focused attention of someone encountering a sound they have not heard in a long time and are trying to place. The barley tea is better, she said. The barley tea is better, I agreed, and brought it the next day and every day after. The next day I brought her a cutting. A small clay pot, I had found one in the maintenance stores on the service level, meant for something else, repurposed, filled with soil from the garden beds below. The terravine cutting was 3 inches tall, 2 leaves, a stubborn little thing that looked like nothing and would grow into something if you let it. Sunlight and water, I said, setting it on the table between us. That's all it asks. She picked it up with both hands. She held it the way you hold something that has been given to you by someone who knows you, which is different from the way you hold something that has been delivered on a tray by someone who does not. Thank you, she said. It was the first time she had used those words with me, and the quiet weight of them told me she was not talking about the plant. 2 weeks in, Kivero found me in the staff corridor after a shift. "Dr. Kale," he said. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression as composed as ever, but there was something behind it, not anger exactly, but the careful, measured tension of someone managing a situation they had hoped would resolve itself. "Kivero, you are aware that the Sethali antechamber is not a designated dining area for staff." "I am." "You are aware that the heir's daily schedule is structured, and that unscheduled interactions with staff are not within the court standard." "I am." "Then you are aware that your midday visits to the antechamber are outside protocol." "I eat my lunch there," I said. "The heir joins me of her own choice. I am not entering her quarters. I am not disrupting her schedule. She comes to the antechamber, she eats bread, she goes back." "The heir should not be eating with staff." "The heir should be eating," I said. "She's underweight. The trend has been declining for over a year. I have flagged it in 3 consecutive reports and the response has been noted. Continue monitoring." "She is monitored. She is not improving. She is, however, eating more since she started joining me for lunch." Kivero was quiet for a moment. His pale eyes studied me with the careful attention of someone who is accustomed to managing fragile systems and who has just discovered an unregulated variable. "The separation is not a punishment, Dr. Kale," he said. "It is a preparation. The heir learns to stand alone, to eat alone, to sleep alone, to make decisions without the influence of companionship. It is how the Wren have been shaped for 9 generations." "I understand that," I said. "And I understand that she's 22 years old and she has not shared a meal with another person since she was 16, and her body is telling you what her words won't. She's not eating because eating alone has stopped meaning anything to her. The food is adequate. The food has always been adequate. That's not the problem." Kivero said nothing. "If you want me to stop," I said, "put it in the medical record. Write an order that says the court instructed the physician to discontinue a practice that was improving the patient's nutritional intake. I'll countersign it. Nethavar can file it." He looked at me for a long time. Then he inclined his head, not the court inclination, something smaller, something that might have been acknowledgement, and walked away. Nobody put anything in writing. I kept bringing lunch. The princess kept coming out. The terravine on the antechamber windowsill grew 2 new leaves, then 4. She was watering it, I realized, not on my instructions, but because she had started paying attention to it the way you pay attention to something that is yours. We talked about the provinces. The Althari homeworld had 3 major agricultural regions: the highland plateaus, the coastal shelves, and the lowland river valleys, and the grain from each tasted different depending on the mineral content of the soil. She knew this in theory from her tutors. I knew it in practice, because Marit sourced from all 3 regions and I could taste the difference in the bread. "The highland grain is nuttier," I said, tearing a piece and offering it to her. "More iron in the soil. The lowland grain is softer, sweeter, better for flatbread." She tasted both. I did not know grain could taste different depending on where it grew. "Everything does," I said. "Terravine from a clay pot on a windowsill tastes different from terravine grown in open ground. Thinner, sharper. It's still terravine, but the soil shapes it." She looked at the clay pot on the sill. "The soil shapes it," she repeated quietly, and I knew she was not talking about the herb. By the fourth week, the changes were measurable. Her mass index had stabilized. Not climbing yet, but no longer falling, the slope had flattened, and her caloric intake, based on the kitchen's tracking of what came back on the trays, had increased. She was eating the meals they sent, not just rearranging them. And she was eating my bread, which was not tracked, which meant the real number was higher. But the changes that were not measurable were larger. She began asking about the garden, not through the protocol officers, directly to me over lunch. What grew there, what the groundskeepers planted in autumn, whether the terravine would survive outdoors in the palace soil. "It would," I said. "The climate's right. You'd want to plant it in a south-facing bed near a wall where it can get heat off the stone." "I have not been in the garden," she said, "since the separation." I looked at her. "Would you like to go?" The question sat between us like a stone in a stream. She did not answer it that day. But the next day, when I came to the antechamber with the bread and the thermos, she was standing by the window, looking down at the garden below. She was wearing walking shoes. We went down together. I carried the lunch. She walked beside me through the spiral corridors, past the protocol officers who stopped and stared as the air descended, level by level, through terraces she had not visited in 6 years. Nobody stopped us. Nobody quite knew how. The protocol had no provision for the heir walking to the garden with the human doctor, because the protocol had never imagined the heir would want to. I watched her as we descended. Her posture was the same, straight-backed, composed, the carriage of someone who had been taught since childhood to move like a sovereign. But her hands were different. They were not folded. They were at her sides, and her fingers opened and closed, as though they were reaching for something they had not yet found. On the 36th terrace, we passed a window that looked out over the plateau beyond the spire's base. She stopped. The glass was floor to ceiling, and the light came through it gold and full, and outside the native grasses bent in a wind that I could see but not feel. "I forgot how far you can see from here," she said. "It's something," I said. She stood there for a moment longer. Then she turned and continued down the spiral, and her steps were a fraction faster than before. The garden was a broad, terraced space at the base of the spire, sheltered by crystal walls on 3 sides and open to the sky on the 4th. The groundskeepers, 2 humans, 1 Althari, had planted it in the Althari style. Geometric beds, precise rows, every plant in its ordained place. But at the edges, where the formal beds met the palace walls, things grew wilder. Trailing vines, self-seeded grasses, a patch of small blue flowers that one of the human groundskeepers told me were volunteers. They had arrived on their own, and nobody had the heart to pull them. We sat on a stone bench near the volunteers. I unwrapped the bread. She took her half without waiting for me to offer. "The air is different down here," she said. She was looking at the blue flowers, and there was something in her face that I had not seen before, not quite wonder, not quite relief, but the particular expression of someone who has been looking through a window for a very long time and has just stepped through it. "It's warmer," I said. "Lower altitude, more moisture. The crystal walls hold heat." "It smells like the bread," she said. "That's because the terravine grows near here. Marit harvests it for the kitchen." She ate. I ate. The groundskeepers gave us a wide berth, pretending to be busy with things that did not need attention. The light was gold and the air was warm and the blue flowers nodded in a breeze I could not feel. And for a while we were just 2 people eating bread on a bench in a garden, which was, I suppose, the most radical thing that had happened in the Renville Spire in 9 generations. After that, she went to the garden every day. Not always with me. My work kept me on the staff tier most afternoons, and the upper terrace visits were limited to midday. But the groundskeepers reported it to me, quietly, with the careful neutrality of people who understood they were witnessing something they were not supposed to comment on. The heir had been seen walking in the garden. The heir had asked about the soil composition of the south-facing beds. The heir had requested a trowel. I brought her a trowel. She planted the taro vine, the original cutting from the antechamber sill, in the south-facing bed near the palace wall, where the stone held heat and the light was steady. I watched her dig. Her hands, which were made for signing treaties and holding scepters, sank into the dirt with a quiet competence that told me this was not the first time she had wanted to touch something real. "It'll take root in a few days," I said. "Keep the soil damp, not wet. If the leaves yellow, it needs more sun." "I know," she said. "You told me." She almost smiled again, closer this time. Word reached the court. It had to the heir descending to the garden, eating with the human physician, planting herbs in the formal beds. Nethavar summoned me. "You were instructed," he said, standing behind his desk, his white coat pristine, "to follow the structured sequence and to refrain from unnecessary interaction with the heir." "I follow the structured sequence during examinations," I said. "The lunches are outside examination hours. They're on my personal time." "You are sharing meals with the heir." "I'm eating my lunch, she joins me." Dr. Kale, the separation is a foundational element of the heir's preparation for the throne. It has been observed for 9 generations. It is not a suggestion. It is the architecture of succession. "I understand," I said, "but her mass index has stabilized for the first time in over a year. Her caloric intake is up. She is sleeping better, she told me herself, and the night monitor data confirms it. She is walking in the garden, she is engaging with the ground staff, and she is eating meals rather than rearranging them on a plate. If the separation is the architecture of succession, then the architecture was producing an heir who was slowly starving herself in a room full of food. Whatever I'm doing, it's working." Nethavar's expression did not change. His eyes, pale, lavender, beautiful, cold, held mine for a long moment. "You have a peculiar understanding of your role here, Dr. Kale." "I have a clear understanding of my role here," I said. "I'm a doctor, she's a patient. She was declining, now she's not, that's the whole of it." He did not answer. He looked at his console, tapped a notation I could not see, and dismissed me with a movement of his hand that was so practiced it was nearly invisible. No order appeared in the medical record. No directive from the court. No formal instruction to cease. The Althari, I was learning, did not issue orders they were not certain would be obeyed. And they were not certain because the alternative, documenting that the court had instructed a physician to stop a treatment that was working, was worse than the discomfort of a human eating bread with the heir. The weeks continued. I brought lunch. She came down to the garden, we ate, we talked. She asked about my other postings. I told her about the Koreth orbitals, the narrow corridors, the fasting rituals, the princeling who was not allowed to be addressed by name. She asked if all royal houses kept their heirs separate. "Some do," I said, "in different ways. Humans did for a long time. Sent their young royals away to be educated, separated from family, surrounded by strangers who taught them duty and discipline." "Did it work?" I thought about it. "It produced leaders," I said. "Whether they were happy leaders is a different question." She was quiet for a while. The garden was still around us, the light beginning its slow shift toward the silver blue of evening. The taro vine she had planted was thriving, 6 inches tall now, bushy, a deep green that stood out against the pale formal plantings around it. She also asked about the kitchen. Not the formal kitchen on the 20th terrace, where the Althari chefs prepared the elaborate trays that arrived through the service corridor. She knew that kitchen well enough from the food it produced. She asked about the lower kitchen, the staff kitchen, where Marit baked the bread and ground the herb paste and stored the callan fruit in clay bins that kept it cool. The kitchen that smelled of flour and yeast and the sharp sweet scent of callan fruit peel, and that she had never seen, and that had produced every piece of bread she had eaten in the antechamber with me. "What is it like?" she asked one afternoon, sitting on the garden bench with flatbread crumbs on her formal layers. Small, I said. Warm, loud when Merritt is singing. She sings while she needs. Old songs, human songs. She sings. She says the dough rises better when you sing to it. Does it? I have no scientific basis for the claim, but the bread is very good. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the bread cloth on the bench between us. I would like to see the kitchen, she said, and then, more carefully, as if she were testing the edges of a sentence she had never been permitted to speak, I would like to meet Merritt. I brought her the following week. Merritt, to her eternal credit, treated the heir of the Althari throne exactly the way she treated every other person who walked into her kitchen. She handed her an apron, pointed her to the flour, and told her to knead. The princess stood at the stone counter with flour on her formal sleeves and her silver hair tied back with a kitchen cloth, and she kneaded dough for 20 minutes while Merritt talked about hydration ratios and oven temperatures and the difference between highland grain and lowland grain. The princess listened with an attention I had never seen her give to anything, not even the structured sequence. She came back to the kitchen 3 more times before my contract ended. Merritt taught her to make flatbread. The bread was not good, too thick, unevenly torn, baked a fraction too long, and the princess ate it with more appetite than I had ever seen her bring to the elaborate trays from the formal kitchen above. She ate it standing at the counter, the way Merritt and I ate, and when a crumb fell on her sleeve, she brushed it off with the back of her hand like someone who had flour on her hands and did not mind. That was the thing, I think. Not the bread, not the garden, not the terravine. It was the not minding. The permission to be a person who gets crumbs on her clothes and flour on her sleeves and dirt under her nails. The permission that no protocol could grant and that no court official could take away, because it was not a permission at all. It was simply the way people live when they live among other people, and she had never had it, and now she did. "What does terravine taste like when it grows in the ground?" she asked. "Fuller," I said, "rounder, less sharp." "I would like to taste that." "It'll be ready in another week or 2. I'll bring the oil and the salt." She nodded, and for the first time she did smile, small, brief, a thing that lived in the corners of her mouth and the slight narrowing of her eyes, and that disappeared as quickly as it arrived. But it was there, and I saw it. The Queen saw it too. I did not know at first that the Queen was watching. The Renville spire was large, and the Queen's chambers were on a separate tier, the 61st terrace, above the heir's 42nd, connected by a private spiral that I had no reason to know existed. But one afternoon, as I was leaving the garden after lunch, I looked up and saw a figure on the terrace above, tall, silver-haired, dressed in pale formal layers, standing at the railing with her hands folded. Tailindra Wren, the Queen. She was looking down at the garden bench where the princess and I had been sitting, at the bread crumbs on the stone, at the clay cup I had left there to dry, at the terravine growing in the south-facing bed. Our eyes met. She did not incline her head. She did not speak. She looked at me the way you look at something you are still deciding about, not with suspicion, not with gratitude, but with the careful, measured attention of someone who has been governing for a long time and who knows that the most important things are often the smallest. I inclined my head, the standard human acknowledgement, nothing more, and walked inside. She never spoke to me, not once in the remaining weeks of my contract, save for one exception. I was leaving the garden on a late afternoon, the light turning to its silver-blue phase when I found her standing in the corridor at the base of the spiral. She was alone. No protocol officer, no attendant. Just the Queen, tall and still, her silver hair gathered at her nape, her hands folded the way her daughter folded hers. "Dr. Kale," she said. "Your Majesty." She looked at me. Her eyes were the same pale violet as her daughter's, but older, not in the sense of age exactly, but in the sense of weight. Eyes that had governed and compromised and watched things happen that she could not change. "The south garden bed," she said. "The herb you planted." "The terravine, your daughter planted it, ma'am. I only provided the cutting." She considered this. The corridor was quiet around us. Somewhere above, the panel lights shifted from gold to silver. "It is thriving," she said. "It's a stubborn plant," I said. "It does well when it's given sun and soil and left to itself." She looked at me for a long moment. I could not read her expression. It was too controlled, too practiced. The face of someone who had learned long ago not to show what she was thinking to anyone who might report it. But there was something behind it, something held back, and I thought it might have been grief or relief or the particular pain of a mother who had followed tradition, because tradition was all she had, and who had just watched a stranger do the thing she could not. She inclined her head, not the court inclination, something deeper, something I had not seen from any authority in 6 months, and walked past me up the spiral without another word. But the kitchen staff told me, in the quiet way that palace staff share information, that the queen had begun visiting the garden in the early mornings before the heir was awake. She walked the paths. She paused at the south-facing bed. She looked at the terravine. My contract ran 6 months. I had taken it because the window faced east and the pay was fair, and I completed it for the same reasons. The work was done. The human staff were healthy. The princess's mass index had climbed back to the middle of the normal range and was holding steady. She ate her formal meals now, not all of them, not with enthusiasm, but enough. And she ate lunch with me, and that was different from eating alone, and the difference was the thing that mattered. On the last week, Nethavar offered me a renewal. Standard terms, 6 more months. He delivered the offer with the same procedural neutrality he delivered everything. But there was something underneath it, a careful note, almost imperceptible, that might have been a request. "I appreciate it," I said, "but I have another posting. The Delvany border station starts in 19 days. I committed to it before I came here." He nodded. He did not press. He filed the contract closure and returned to his console, and that was that. I spent the last 2 days packing. There was not much to pack. 23 years of contract medicine teaches you to travel light. The diagnostic kit went into its case. The clothes went into the duffel. The thermos, the herb paste jar, the bread cloth. I cleaned the quarters more thoroughly than was required, because that is what you do when you have lived somewhere for 6 months and it has treated you well. I wiped the sill where the terravine had sat, the ring of water it had left on the crystal, the faint green dust of dried leaves that had fallen, and that I had never swept because there had always been a reason to leave them. The terravine, the mother plant, the original cutting I had carried from post to post for a decade, I watered it that last evening and wrapped the pot in a towel for transit, the way I always did. It had grown larger here than anywhere else. The east-facing window, the clean air, the faintly sweet warmth of the Althari sun. It would miss this sill. I would miss this sill. I said goodbye to the human staff on the last morning. The groundskeepers, the kitchen assistants, the structural engineer with the bad shoulder that was finally improving. Merritt gave me a jar of herb paste, the good kind, made with fresh terravine and callan-fruit oil, sealed in wax, and told me to eat it slowly because she would not be there to make more. "You're a better doctor than you think," she said. "I'm exactly the doctor I think," I said. "The bread did the work." "The bread," she said, "did not sit in a chair too tall for it and eat with a princess." I had no good answer for that, so I took the jar and put it in my bag. On the last morning, I went up to the 42nd terrace. I had no examination scheduled. I had no reason to be there by any protocol. I went because it was midday and I had bread and it was the last time. The antechamber was empty. The terravine cutting she had taken from this sill months ago was gone. She had transplanted it to the garden. The sill was bare. The light came through the south-facing windows and fell on nothing. I sat in the chair. I unwrapped the bread. I waited. She did not come. I ate alone. It was, I reflected, The first time I had done that in this room since the day she had walked through the inner door and stood there looking at my lunch with an expression I had not understood at the time and understood perfectly now. I folded the cloth, capped the thermos, and stood. The inner door opened. She was standing there in the walking shoes and the soft, informal layers, and her silver white hair was loose, and she was holding something in both hands, a clay pot, small, brown, ordinary. Inside it, a terravine cutting 3 inches tall, 2 leaves taken from the plant she had grown in the garden bed. A cutting of a cutting of a cutting. The same stubborn herb passed along. "Edrin," she said. "Not Dr. Kale, not physician, not the human doctor. My name. The one my mother gave me, the one that was mine before any title or role or contract. She said it the way you say a word you have been holding in your mouth for a long time, testing its weight, and have finally decided to let go." "Ilyeth," I said. She held out the pot. I took it. The clay was warm from her hands. "The terravine is growing," she said. "The one in the garden, it took root." "I know," I said. "The groundskeepers told me." "This one is for your next posting." She paused. "So you will have a cutting." I looked at the small pot in my hands. I looked at her. She was standing very straight, the way she always stood, the way 9 generations of protocol had taught her to stand, but her eyes were not transparent anymore. They were looking at me the way a person looks at another person, and there was something in them that had not been there on the first day, and that I did not have a name for, and that I did not need to name, because it was simply the thing that happens when someone has been seen. "I'll keep it in sunlight," I said. She almost smiled, closer than the first time, closer than the second. "Thank you," she said, "for the bread." "It was just bread," I said. "No," she said, "it wasn't." I nodded. I picked up my bag. I put the clay pot on top where it would ride steady. I walked to the corridor and I turned once, and she was standing in the antechamber doorway with the light behind her, and she raised one hand, not a wave, not a formal gesture, just a hand lifted and held, the way you do when someone is leaving and you want them to know you are watching them go. I walked down the spiral, 42 terraces. My boots scuffed the crystal floors and nobody mentioned it. In the staff corridor on the 5th terrace, I passed Merritt coming off her kitchen shift. "You're off then," she said. "I'm off." She's eating, you know, more than before. The trays come back nearly empty now. "Good," I said. "Whatever you did," Merritt said, "it worked." "I didn't do anything," I said. "I shared my lunch." Merritt looked at me the way people look at you when they know you are underselling something, and she shook her head, and she handed me a wrapped loaf of flatbread for the transit shuttle, and I took it. I learned what the Queen did 3 months later from a letter Merritt sent to the Delveni border station. A short letter, written in Merritt's practical hand, mostly about kitchen gossip and the new human structural engineer who had replaced the old one. At the end, she added a postscript. The Queen issued a standing provision order for the heir's quarters. 1 item, terravine fresh-cut weekly sourced from the South Garden bed, added to the heir's standard meal preparation herb paste, oil, salt. The kitchen makes it the way you showed me. The heir eats it at midday. She does not eat alone anymore. Kivel sits with her. I don't know who authorized it. Nobody seems to know. The order appeared in the provision ledger in the Queen's hand, unsigned, undated, as though it had always been there. I read the letter in my quarters at the border station. The window there faced west, and the light in the evenings was thin and red, nothing like the warm gold of the Renville spire. But the terravine was on the sill, her cutting, the one she had given me, growing in the pot that was warm from her hands. It had put out 4 new leaves in transit. Stubborn thing. I watered it. I sat in the chair by the window. I did not eat alone that evening, because Merritt's bread was still in my bag and the terravine was on the sill, and both of those things were company in a way I had not understood before a young woman in a crystal tower looked at a piece of flatbread and remembered what it meant to share a meal. 6 years every meal, alone. And then a doctor sat down and said, have some bread. That was all it took. That was everything it took. The most embarrassingly ordinary thing in the world, a torn piece of flatbread, a cup of barley tea, a seat in a chair too tall for a human, and the architecture of 9 generations shifted, quietly, without ceremony, without a decree, because a patient was hungry and a doctor had extra and neither of them understood that what they were doing was impossible. I still carry the Taravine. 4 postings later, it is on a new sill in a new room and it is growing. It will always be growing. Some things, once they take root, do not stop.